The air in the grand ballroom of the Astoria crackled with the electricity of 1,000 diamonds and $1 million charity pledge. On stage, real estate magnate Jesse Ellington, the city's golden boy, was basking in the glow of a standing ovation. But as the applause faded, a lone figure in a server's uniform walked towards the podium, not with a glass of water, but with a simple blue folder. In front of 500 of New York's elite and a dozen rolling cameras, Jesse was handed a document. The camera zoomed in, and the words on the cover sheet were unmistakable: petition for dissolution of marriage. The gasp from the crowd was a tidal wave of shock, but the real story wasn't just the public divorce. It was what happened 37 minutes earlier, when Jesse's mistress decided to mock his 7 months pregnant wife, not knowing she wasn't mocking a victim, but triggering the final move in a perfectly calculated game of checkmate. Callista Pierce Ellington believed for a time in the fairy tale. She wasn't born into the world of trust funds and summer homes in the Hamptons. She was an architect, a woman who built things with her hands, and her mind finding elegance in blueprints and strength in steel frames. She met Jesse Ellington at a fundraiser for urban renewal, a project she had designed. He was charisma personified, a dazzling smile, a tailored suit that cost more than her car, and a way of looking at her that made her feel like she was the only person in a crowded room. He pursued her relentlessly. He loved her authenticity, he said. He was tired of the vapid socialites, the women who were more portfolio than person. Kay, with her sharp wit and genuine passion for her work, was a breath of fresh air. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jet trips to Paris for dinner, front-row seats at Fashion Week, and extravagant gifts. When he proposed on a yacht off the coast of Santorini, with a ring that held the weight of a small house, she said yes. She was in love. But a gilded cage, no matter how beautiful, is still a cage. After 2 years of marriage, the gold had started to feel like brass. Jesse's adoration for her authenticity slowly morphed into a desire to mold her. Her sensible professional wardrobe was replaced by designer gowns he'd have sent to their sprawling Park Avenue penthouse. Her intimate dinners with old friends were overshadowed by mandatory appearances at galas where she was expected to smile, nod, and be the perfect accessory to the Ellington name. Her architectural career, once the cornerstone of her identity, was gently pushed aside. "You don't need to work, darling," he'd say, kissing her forehead. "Your project is us now." The cracks at First Hairline began to widen. There were the late-night board meetings that left his collar smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, something cloying and sweet like desperate ambition. There were the hushed phone calls he'd take on the terrace, his back to her, his voice a low, intimate murmur. When she'd ask, he'd laugh it off. "Just business, Kay. You wouldn't want to be bored with the details." He had a talent for making her feel paranoid, for making her questions seem like accusations born of insecurity rather than intuition. Then came the pregnancy. It was unplanned, a surprise that Kay secretly hoped would be the glue to mend their fracturing marriage. She imagined it would reawaken the man she fell in love with, the man who wanted to build a real life, not just an empire. For a few weeks it seemed to work. Jesse was ecstatic, parading the news around their social circle like a new acquisition. He touched her belly for the cameras, his smile broad and proud. He was Jesse Ellington, the man who had it all, the billions, the beautiful wife, and now the heir. But the performance faded quickly. The late nights returned more frequent than before. His phone was now guarded like a state secret, angled away from her, and silenced the moment she entered a room. He grew distant, his touches perfunctory. When she tried to talk to him about her fears about their future as a family, he'd wave a dismissive hand. "Everything's fine, Kay. Don't stress yourself out. It's not good for the baby. The baby? It had become her identity, her sole purpose in his world, and yet another tool to silence her. The upcoming Metropolitan Children's Foundation Gala was the pinnacle of Jessie's social calendar. This year, the Ellington Corporation was the lead sponsor. He was set to receive the foundation's prestigious Visionary of the Year award and give the keynote address. For weeks, it was all he talked about. He micromanaged every detail from the seating chart to the floral arrangements. "You have to be there, Kay," he'd said, not as a request, but as a command. "It's our big night. You need to look radiant." He had a custom gown commissioned from a top designer, a shimmering silver creation designed to both flatter and showcase her 7-month baby bump. "We're selling a story here, darling," he explained. "Power family legacy. It's all part of the brand." Kay felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this big night was not about them. It was about him. She was just a prop in his grand production. The night before the gala, she found a receipt from a high-end jewelry store, Van Cleef & Arpels tucked into his coat pocket. It wasn't for her. Her birthday and their anniversary had long passed. It was for an Alhambra necklace, delicate, expensive, and a well-known favorite of the city's younger, flashier crowd. That was the moment the last vestige of her hope died. She knew he wasn't just careless. He was arrogant. He didn't believe he could be caught, or perhaps he simply didn't care if he was. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the penthouse window, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The city lights blurred through her tears. The fairy tale was over. She was no longer building a life with him. She was trapped inside one of his constructions, and she knew it was time to design her own way out. The foundation was compromised, and the only solution was demolition. The grand ballroom at the Astoria was a masterpiece of calculated opulence. Chandeliers dripped with crystals like frozen waterfalls, casting a warm golden light over the 500 guests. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the scent of money old and new. Every detail screamed prestige, a perfect backdrop for Jesse Ellington to cement his image as a philanthropic titan. Kay moved through the room with a practiced grace, a serene smile fixed on her face. Her silver gown shimmered under the lights, the soft fabric draping elegantly over her pregnant form. To the outside world, she was the picture of contentment, the adoring, expectant wife of the man of the hour. Inside her heart beat a steady, cold rhythm. She was an actress on a stage, and tonight she was giving her final performance. Jesse was in his element, gliding from one powerful handshake to another, his arm possessively around Kay's lower back. "This is my wife, Callista." He'd boom his voice full of pride. "The architect of my happiness." The irony was so thick she could taste it. With every introduction, she would see the flicker in their eyes, the women sizing her up, the men giving Jesse a knowing, congratulatory nod. She understood the unspoken language of this world. She was his greatest asset, the beautiful, stable home front that allowed him to be the conquering hero. She spotted her first. Across the ballroom, holding court near the silent auction display, was a woman who seemed to suck the light from her surroundings and reflect it back magnified. She was impossibly chic in a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was a severe black bob, her lips painted the same shade as her dress. It was Bianca Roche. Kay knew of her, of course. Bianca was a gallerist of minor repute, but a social media influencer of major ambition. Her Instagram feed was a curated collage of borrowed glamour, posing on yachts she didn't own, in front of art she couldn't afford, always on the arm of some wealthy transient benefactor. She was everything Kay was not: loud, artificial, and desperate. And she was wearing the Van Cleef & Arpels Alhambra necklace. The delicate gold clovers with their mother-of-pearl inlays rested against her collarbone, a stark white against her tanned skin. It was a beacon, a declaration. Jessie's grip on Kay's back tightened for a fraction of a second. He had seen her too. "Don't!" he murmured, his voice, a low warning, meant only for her ears, his smile never faltering. "Don't make a scene." A scene was the furthest thing from Kay's mind. A scene was messy, emotional, and unpredictable. Her plan was anything but. So she simply nodded her placid smile, unwavering, and allowed him to steer her towards their table at the front of the room. But Bianca was not one for subtlety. As the evening wore on, Kay felt her presence like a physical weight. Bianca had managed to get a seat at a nearby table, one filled with younger, boisterous airs and influencers. Her laughter was always just a little too loud, her gestures a little too theatrical, all of it directed towards Jessie's line of sight. She was a hunter, and she wanted everyone to know who her prey was. The first direct assault was disguised as an accident. As Kay was returning from the powder room, navigating the narrow path between tables, Bianca stood up abruptly, bumping into her hard enough to make Kay stumble. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," Bianca gushed, her voice dripping with faux concern. She reached out, placing a perfectly manicured hand directly on Kay's baby bump. The touch was invasive proprietary. "Are you all right? We have to be so careful with precious cargo." Her eyes, dark and sharp, met Kay's. There was no apology in them, only a glint of triumphant malice. "Jessie must be so thrilled," she continued, her voice just loud enough for those at the surrounding tables to hear. "To be starting a new family. It's so traditional." The insinuation was clear. New family, as opposed to the one he was supposedly building with her. Kay gently removed Bianca's hand from her stomach. "We are very happy, thank you," she said, her voice even and calm. She refused to give Bianca the satisfaction of a reaction. She was a statue, unmovable. But the serpent had tasted blood. It was clear this was just the beginning of her performance. For the next hour, Bianca was a shadow, a constant, irritating presence at the edge of Kay's vision. She would, coincidentally, be talking to someone Jessie needed to see, forcing an awkward, trio-filled conversation. She would toast him from across the room, her crimson lips pursed in a silent kiss. Jessie, for his part, was a coward. He played his role laughing off Bianca's advances with a forced charm that didn't fool anyone, least of all Kay. He would try to steer Kay away, but Bianca was persistent, a heat-seeking missile of home-wrecking intent. He was trapped between the woman who held his legacy and the woman who held his leash, and his panic was beginning to show. He looked at Kay with pleading eyes, begging her with his silence to endure it, to get through the night, to protect his image. Kay watched it all with a chilling sense of detachment. The anger and hurt that had once consumed her had crystallized into something hard and pure resolve. She wasn't watching the destruction of her marriage. She was watching her husband and his mistress dig their own graves with silver spoons, and she was more than happy to let them keep digging. The main event, the keynote speech, was still to come, and so was the grand finale she had so carefully designed. The subtle jabs and veiled insults were merely the appetizer. The main course of humiliation was served just as the waiters were clearing the dessert plates. The formal program was about to begin with Jessie's award presentation as the crowning moment. It was during this brief lull, as the lights dimmed slightly and the murmur of the crowd softened, that Bianca made her final, most audacious move. She approached their table, a champagne flute in hand, her crimson dress a slash of defiance in the golden room. She didn't even pretend to be addressing anyone else. Her focus was entirely on Kay, who sat with the posture of a queen, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Jesse, who was speaking with the event organizer, froze mid-sentence, his face paling. "Callista, darling," Bianca began, her voice syrupy sweet. "I just have to say you are absolutely glowing. Pregnancy suits you. It's very maternal." She let the word hang in the air, freighting it with condescension. Kay simply smiled. "Thank you, Bianca." The lack of a flustered response seemed to annoy Bianca, spurring her to escalate. "I just hope you're getting all the rest you can now," she continued, leaning in conspiratorially, her perfume and suffocating cloud. "Because once the baby comes, a woman's body is just never the same. Things shift. It's a shame, really. Men, especially men like Jesse, have a taste for things that are firm, unchanged." This was it, the direct, undeniable strike. She wasn't just insulting Kay, she was declaring her own perceived value, her own firm and unchanged status as the superior choice. The guests at the tables closest to them had fallen silent, their eyes wide, watching the drama unfold with a mixture of horror and glee. This was better than any reality show. Jesse finally moved, stepping between them. "Bianca, that's enough," he hissed, his voice tight with panic. His eyes darted around, checking who was listening. His reputation was bleeding out on the ballroom floor. But Bianca wasn't speaking to him. She looked past him, her venomous gaze fixed on Kay. She lowered her voice to a dramatic whisper that still carried to the enthralled onlookers. "Enjoy this moment, Callista. Enjoy playing the wife. Because a belly has a due date, and so does a woman's shelf life." She punctuated the cruel remark with a small, triumphant smirk and took a delicate sip of her champagne. A collective, silent gasp rippled through the nearby tables. It was an act of such breathtaking cruelty, delivered with such precision, that it left everyone speechless. They had all just witnessed a public execution of a marriage. And in that moment, something inside Callista Pierce Ellington broke. But it wasn't her spirit. It was the last chain holding her to the woman she used to be, the woman who hoped, who forgave, who made excuses for the man she loved. That woman was gone. In her place was an architect looking at a condemned building, cold, precise, ready for demolition. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She slowly rose to her feet, her movements deliberate and graceful. The room seemed to hold its breath. She was taller than Bianca, and with the added height of her heels and the regal bearing of her posture, she towered over the woman in red. She looked not at Bianca, but at her husband. She looked deep into his terrified, pleading eyes. She saw him for exactly what he was, a weak, terrified boy hiding in a powerful man's suit. A man who would allow this to happen, who would allow the mother of his child to be savaged in public just to avoid a difficult conversation. "Thank you, Jesse," she said, her voice not much louder than a normal conversational tone, yet it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "Thank you for making things so perfectly clear." She didn't spare another glance for Bianca, dismissing her as one would an annoying insect. She turned and walked away from the table. She didn't storm out. She didn't run. She walked with her head held high, a solitary silver-clad figure of immense dignity, her path parting the sea of shocked faces. As she reached the grand archway of the ballroom, she could hear the event organizer's frantic voice over the microphone trying to regain control. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, a man who needs no introduction. Please welcome to the stage our visionary of the year." Mr. Jesse Ellington. A smattering of confused, hesitant applause broke out. Kay didn't look back. She pushed open the heavy oak doors and walked out into the cool, quiet marble hallway. She pulled out her phone, her hand perfectly steady. She found the number in her contacts and pressed call. It was answered on the first ring. "Audrey." Kay said, her voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. "It's time. Execute the plan. Now." The plan hadn't been born of tonight's venomous exchange. It had been drafted, revised, and perfected over the past 4 months. Kay was an architect after all. She didn't just build structures. She understood that the most enduring ones required a flawless blueprint, a solid foundation, and the foresight to account for every possible stress factor. Her marriage, she had concluded, was built on sand, and a hurricane was coming. So she had designed a fortress. Her ally and the contractor for her vengeance was Audrey Chen, a divorce attorney, so sharp she could have cut diamonds. Audrey wasn't the kind of lawyer who advertised on daytime television. Her name was passed in hushed, reverent tones among the city's wealthiest wives. She was a legend known for her discretion, her ruthlessness, and her uncanny ability to dismantle the empires of arrogant men. The first meeting had taken place in a discreet, wood-paneled office in Midtown. Kay, her pregnancy not yet showing, had laid out her suspicions. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the emotional distance. Audrey listened without interruption, her face impassive. Suspicion is not evidence. Mrs. Ellington, Audrey had said, her voice calm and measured. The prenuptial agreement you both signed is ironclad, but it contains a standard infidelity clause. It is, shall we say, punitive. If you can prove adultery, the terms shift dramatically in your favor. Not just a generous settlement, but a significant portion of assets acquired during the marriage, including stock in Ellington Corporation. He stands to lose control, but the burden of proof is high. And so Kay had agreed to the hiring of a private investigator. Not some trench-coated cliché, but a former MI6 agent named Mr. Finch, a ghost who specialized in the indiscretions of the 1%. For 3 months, Finch was an invisible shadow. He documented everything. The evidence he compiled was damning and voluminous. There were photographs of Jesse and Bianca Roche entering a boutique hotel in Soho, a known celebrity hideaway. There were credit card statements detailing lavish gifts, the Van Cleef & Arpels necklace, a Cartier watch, a weekend trip to St. Bart's, charged to a corporate card. But the masterstroke, the piece of evidence that transformed the case from a simple divorce into a corporate takedown, was something Kay herself had uncovered. During a sleepless night, she had gone into Jesse's home office. On his desk, left open with the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable, was a laptop. A file he had forgotten to close detailed the financials of a shell corporation, Roche Holdings LLC. It was registered in Bianca's name. Jesse had been funneling money from Ellington Corporation into it under the guise of art consulting fees. He was not only funding his mistress's lifestyle, he was committing corporate fraud, embezzling from his own company to do it. He was using company funds to buy her jewelry, to finance her gallery, to build her a life, all while telling Kay they needed to be fiscally responsible and table her plans to start her own architectural firm until after the baby comes. When Kay presented this to Audrey Chen, the lawyer's stoic expression finally broke into a slow, predatory smile. "Callista," she said, the formal Mrs. Ellington now gone. "This is no longer a divorce. This is a demolition. The infidelity clause will give you his fortune. This," she tapped the file on Roche Holdings, "will give you his crown." They spent the next month meticulously crafting the legal assault. Audrey's team of forensic accountants traced every dollar. They prepared the divorce petition, citing irreconcilable differences, but attached a sealed addendum detailing the fraud and adultery, complete with photographic evidence and financial records. It was a ticking time bomb. The final piece of the blueprint was the delivery. It had to be public. It had to be humiliating. It had to be unforgettable. Jesse lived and died by his public image, his carefully constructed brand of the powerful, benevolent family man. Audrey had argued for a quiet, efficient filing, but Kay had insisted. No. Kay had said, her voice filled with a cold fury that surprised even herself. He made his choice. He chose to humiliate me privately at first, and now he allows his mistress to do it publicly. He wants a stage, I'll give him one. He wants to be the visionary of the year. Let's give everyone a vision of who he truly is. So they planned it for the gala. They knew he would be at his most arrogant, his most celebrated. Audrey had hired a professional process server, a man named Henderson, who was a master of infiltration. He was a former actor, able to blend into any environment. For this evening he would be part of the catering staff, complete with a uniform and a security pass, procured by Mr. Finch. The phone call Kay made as she left the ballroom was the pre-arranged signal. Execute the plan. Now. It meant Henderson was to proceed. It meant Audrey was to electronically file the unsealed addendum with the courts. At the precise moment, Henderson placed the papers in Jesse's hand, ensuring the juicy details would be public record by the time the morning news cycle began. It meant a press release carefully drafted by a crisis PR firm Kay had hired was being sent to every major news outlet in the city. Walking out of the Astoria, Kay didn't feel sadness or regret. She felt a profound, liberating calm. She was no longer a victim in someone else's story. She was the author of her own, and she had just written the climax. The fallout would be immense, the scandal explosive. But for the first time in years, Callista Pierce Ellington felt free. She had taken all the pain, the betrayal, and the humiliation, and she had used it as fuel. She had designed her escape, and the entire structure of Jesse Ellington's world was about to come crashing down, while the grand ballroom of the Astoria was a pressure cooker of whispers and veiled glances. The back of the Lincoln Town car was a sanctuary of profound silence. Kay Pierce Ellington sat perfectly still. The cool leather of the seat, a comforting anchor in a world she had just set spinning. Outside the tinted window, the glittering lights of Manhattan slid past, no longer the bars of a gilded cage, but simply lights on a map leading to a new, uncharted destination. She was not fleeing. She was executing a strategic retreat. Her phone, which had been silent in her clutch, vibrated with a single discreet buzz. It was a text from Audrey Chen. "He's taking the stage. Henderson is in position. It is your call to make Callista." Are we go, Kay looked at the message, the screen's glow, illuminating her impassive face. For a fleeting second, a ghost of the woman she once was flickered within her. A woman who loved this man, who had dreamed of a family with him, who might have found a way to forgive. The memory brought a faint, hollow ache, the phantom pain of an amputated hope. But then she thought of Bianca's cruel, possessive hand on her belly, of her venomous words about a woman's shelf life, and most of all of Jesse's weak, pleading eyes, begging for her silence, for her complicity in her own humiliation. The ache vanished, replaced by a crystalline resolve. She was an architect. When a structure's foundation is rotted through, you do not patch the cracks. You condemn it. You demolish it. And you build something new and stronger in its place. She typed her reply, her fingers steady and precise. Go. A single word. A command. A demolition order. She then sent a second prearranged text to the driver, the Mandarin Oriental please. With her instructions given, she turned her phone off and placed it back in her clutch. There was nothing more for her to do, nothing for her to see. The rest of the performance was for the world, not for her. She leaned her head back against the seat, closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she breathed. Back in the ballroom, Jesse Ellington was breathing too, but his breaths were shallow and laced with adrenaline. The fury he felt toward Kay was a hot, molten core in his gut. How dare she? How dare she walk out on him on his night in front of all these people? The sheer audacity was breathtaking. In his mind, her quiet, dignified exit was a calculated act of sabotage, a selfish tantrum designed to steal his spotlight. He straightened his bow tie, his reflection in the back of a silver serving tray, showing a man in complete control. That was the image he had to project. He was a master of spinning narratives, and this would be his masterpiece. He would transform her insubordination into a touching story of a loving husband and his delicate, expectant wife. As Walter Sterling began the glowing introduction, Jesse's mind raced. He would be charming, gracious. He would mention her, of course, he had to. He would paint a picture of her being overwhelmed by the excitement of needing her rest. He would be the doting, concerned husband. The audience would see a man who was not only a titan of industry, but a devoted family man, a perception that would not only erase the awkwardness of the last 10 minutes, but elevate him even further. It was perfect. He walked onto the stage, the wave of applause, a powerful, reassuring drug. He soaked it in his confidence, surging back with every clap. The panic receded, replaced by the familiar, intoxicating thrill of holding an audience in the palm of his hand. He gripped the sides of the podium, the solid wood grounding him. He was Jesse Ellington. He fixed everything. "Thank you, Walter." He began his voice, a smooth, warm baritone that wrapped the room in its embrace. "It's a profound honor to be here tonight, surrounded by so many friends and generous souls. A community. A family." Meanwhile, near a service entrance, hidden by a large floral display, a man named Henderson felt the silent vibration of his burner phone. He pulled it from his pocket. A single word glowed on the screen: "Go." He deleted the message, slid the phone back into his pocket, and picked up the prop tray holding a single untouched glass of water. His face was a neutral mask. His posture relaxed. He had served papers to belligerent CEOs in their boardrooms and to cheating politicians at their family barbecues. A charity gala was child's play. He had spent the last hour observing, blending in, becoming part of the scenery. He'd watched Kay's exit, noted Bianca's smugness, and now he was watching Jesse's grand performance. He listened as Jesse began to speak, about family, about foundations, about legacy. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Henderson's lips. The irony was always the best part of the job. He began to move his steps silent on the thick carpeting. He was a ghost gliding through a banquet, his purpose known only to him and the woman now speeding away in a town car. He did not look at the guests who turned to watch him, his path as direct and unwavering as the legal document tucked securely inside his jacket. On stage, Jesse was hitting his stride, his voice resonating with manufactured emotion. "My beautiful wife Callista," he said, pausing as a murmur of sympathy went through the crowd. "She is feeling a little unwell tonight, so she couldn't stay. But she has been my rock." He placed a hand over his heart. "And with our own child on the way, the importance of building a safe and prosperous future for the next generation has never been clearer." The audience melted. They were completely under his spell. He was not just a visionary, he was a husband, a father-to-be, a good man. As Jesse basked in the warmth of his own lies, Henderson reached the short set of stairs at the side of the stage. He took the first step, then the second, his movements fluid and economical. The security guard, seeing only a waiter with a glass of water, gave a slight nod. The stage was set. The audience was captivated. The man of the hour was at the absolute peak of his self-created myth. The fuse had been lit, and the instrument of demolition was now just seconds away from its target. The applause was a physical force, a tidal wave of adoration that washed over Jesse Ellington, cleansing him of the evening's earlier ugliness. On stage, bathed in the warm, forgiving glow of the spotlights, he was untouchable. The awkwardness of Kay's departure and Bianca's crass display had melted away forgotten. He was king, and this was his coronation. He held up a hand not to silence them, but to conduct them his smile, a carefully calibrated blend of humility and power. The sound was intoxicating, the validation he craved more than air. From his elevated vantage point, the 500 guests were a blur of glittering jewels and upturned, admiring faces. He was the sun, and they were all planets orbiting his magnificent gravitational pull. His gaze swept the room, a conqueror surveying his domain. He saw Walter Sterling in the front row, nodding with paternal pride. He saw his business rivals, their applause laced with a reluctant envy that was sweeter than any praise. He saw Bianca, her crimson dress, a beacon of victory, her eyes burning with a possessive fire that promised a celebratory night. He had done it. He had weathered the storm, righted the ship, and brought it home to a hero's welcome. His speech, a masterwork of self-aggrandizing sentimentality, disguised as philanthropy, had sealed his legacy. It was at the very zenith of this triumph that he first registered the anomaly. A subtle movement at the periphery of the stage, a shadow detaching itself from the backstage darkness. He initially dismissed it as a stagehand, but the figure didn't retreat. Instead, it began to move toward him. It was one of the waiters, a man with an unremarkable face, carrying himself with an unnerving stillness that was entirely at odds with the frantic energy of the event staff. Jesse's smile tightened slightly. He felt a flicker of annoyance. Who was this person, and what could they possibly want that couldn't wait until he was off stage? He assumed it was for a glass of water, a clumsy, ill-timed gesture that was interrupting the flow of his perfect moment. The man was drawing attention, and the applause was beginning to falter as heads in the front rows turned their expressions, shifting from adoration to mild confusion. The man Henderson moved with an inexorable calm. He did not rush, nor did he hesitate. His path was a straight, deliberate line from the edge of the stage to the podium. He passed the elaborate floral arrangements and the gleaming Visionary of the Year award without a glance. His focus was singular, his destination absolute. To those watching his slow, purposeful walk, felt strangely menacing, like a shark fin cutting through calm water. The low hum of celebratory chatter began to die out, replaced by a ripple of questioning whispers. Henderson stopped less than 3 feet from Jesse. He was close enough that Jesse could see the bland professionalism in his eyes, devoid of the deference he expected from service staff. There was no tray in his hands. "Can this wait?" Jesse murmured, his voice, a low growl meant to convey his displeasure, though the microphone picked up the strained edge. "I'm in the middle of something." Henderson did not react to the tone. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his uniform jacket. The movement was smooth, practiced. What he produced was not a note or a message, but a simple 9 by 12-inch folder. It was a startling shade of cerulean blue, a jarring splash of mundane bureaucracy in a sea of black tie elegance. He held it out. Jesse stared at it, his mind failing to compute. a folder now. "What is this?" he asked, his voice, louder now, tinged with a bewildered frustration that broadcast to every corner of the suddenly quiet ballroom. Henderson's reply was delivered in a flat, dispassionate tone that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "You've been served, Mr. Ellington." The words hung in the air for a single frozen second. Served. The syllables seemed to warp the very atmosphere of the room, sucking the warmth and light out of it. And then Henderson did not wait for Jessie to take the folder. He leaned forward and placed it deliberately on the podium, its blue cover landing, with a soft but definitive thump, directly on top of Jessie's speech notes. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. The silence that followed was no longer respectful. It was a visceral collective intake of breath, a vacuum of shock that was deeper and more profound than any applause. In that silence, the high-definition broadcast camera, operated by a quick-thinking director, sensing a moment of historic drama, zoomed in. The image filled the large screens flanking the stage, a tight shot of the folder. The typed words on the cover sheet were stark, clear, and damning. In re, the marriage of Callista. Pierce Ellington, petitioner, and Jessie P. Ellington, respondent. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The collective gasp was a physical shockwave that rolled through the ballroom. It was a sound of scandalized delight, of morbid fascination, of the brutal, instantaneous death of a reputation. The pretense of polite society vanished. In its place was a raw, primal hunger for drama. A single phone camera flashed, then another and another, until the room was a glittering, strobing constellation of tiny lenses, all pointed at the man in the crucible of the spotlight. The attendees were no longer guests. They were witnesses, paparazzi, a jury for a trial that had just begun. Jessie's face, projected in merciless detail onto the screens, was a horrifying spectacle. The confident, charismatic mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated, turning to dust. The blood drained from his face, leaving a waxy, translucent pallor. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide, with a wild, uncomprehending terror. He was having a nightmare. This was a grotesque, impossible prank. Kay wouldn't. She couldn't. She was his quiet, manageable wife. But the blue folder was undeniably real, an artifact from a reality he had refused to acknowledge. He looked out at the sea of faces and saw that their admiration had curdled into something else, pity, contempt, and a ravenous curiosity. He was no longer a king. He was a specimen pinned under the glass. His frantic gaze found Bianca. The triumphant glow on her face had been extinguished, replaced by a rictus of pure, unadulterated horror. Her mind, usually so quick and calculating, was short-circuiting. The dress, the necklace, the public taunts, she had played her hand so brilliantly, only to discover that she was in the wrong game entirely. She wasn't the queen-in-waiting. She was the scarlet-clad fool the mistress exposed in the most humiliating public forum imaginable. Her victory had turned to ash in her mouth. Henderson, his duty discharged with chilling efficiency, turned without another word. He walked to the back of the stage and descended the stairs, melting back into the shadows from which he had emerged. He was a ghost, a messenger who had delivered a fatal blow, and then simply vanished. Jessie was left utterly alone, trapped in the unforgiving glare. The silence was now broken by a rising tide of frantic whispers. He felt 1,000 invisible arrows piercing his skin. His entire life was built on perception, on the curated image of strength and success. In the space of 30 seconds, his wife had taken a wrecking ball to it all. He reached out a hand, trembling violently, and his fingers brushed against the edge of the blue folder. It felt as cold as a tombstone. The curtain had not just fallen on his speech. It had fallen on Jessie Ellington, and there would be no encore. The explosion on stage at the Astoria sent shockwaves that did not fade with the morning light. They multiplied, amplified by the insatiable engine of the 21st century news cycle. Before the last guest had even retrieved their coat, the clip of Jessie being served was a viral supernova. It was everywhere, replayed in an endless loop on cable news, dissected by morning show hosts with vulture-like glee, and turned into 1,000 merciless memes on social media. The hashtag Ellington Demolition was trending globally. By 9 a.m., the New York Post had hit the stands, its front page a masterpiece of tabloid brutality, a high-resolution photo of Jessie's ashen, stunned face, the blue folder, stark against his tuxedo. The headline screamed in bold white letters read, "Earless tonight, mogul served divorce papers. Mid-speech as pregnant wife flees Gala." But that was only the opening salvo. The real war began when Audrey Chen's perfectly timed court filing was unsealed. The story instantly morphed from a juicy marital drama into a catastrophic corporate scandal. The affair with Bianca Roche was now merely a footnote. The true headline was the meticulous documentation of Roche Holdings, LLC, the fraudulent art consulting fees, the embezzlement. The press didn't just have a story of infidelity, they had a story of greed, corruption, and a CEO who had used his own publicly traded company as a private slush fund for his mistress. For Jessie, the fallout was suffocating. The supportive calls he expected to receive never came. His phone, usually a constant source of affirmation, fell silent. The emergency board meeting was held in a sterile, soundproof room that felt like a tomb. As he walked in, the dozen board members, men who had clapped him on the back just last night, looked at him with the cold, dispassionate eyes of executioners. There was no debate, no discussion. His presence had become a liability, a stain on the pristine reputation of the Ellington Corporation. Walter Sterling, the same man who had called him a visionary on stage, read the motion for his immediate suspension with a voice devoid of any emotion. Jessie was escorted from the building by security, a man unplugged from his own life. The empire wasn't just crumbling, it was actively rejecting him, its creator like a foreign virus. Bianca Roche's demise was less corporate, but just as brutal. She woke up to find her world had vanished. Her name and face were splashed across every news site, branding her not as a glamorous socialite, but as a cheap homewrecker embroiled in a fraud investigation. The man who had bankrolled her existence sent only a single sterile email from his lawyer, severing all ties and warning her against any contact. The friends who had eagerly sipped her champagne and admired her borrowed jewels now crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah, a walking cautionary tale. Her desperate attempts to control the narrative to position herself as another of Jessie's victims were met with scorn and ridicule. She had craved the spotlight, and now she was burning in its unforgiving glare. While their worlds imploded, Kay remained an island of calm in the hurricane she had unleashed. From the quiet sanctuary of her suite at the Mandarin Oriental, overlooking the vast expanse of Central Park, she watched none of it. She had instructed Audrey to filter all information. She refused to pollute her new beginning with the toxic sludge of Jessie's downfall. Her days were not spent consuming news reports, but in quiet consultation with her legal team, in prenatal yoga sessions, and in long, peaceful walks through the park, her hand resting on her belly. The call from Audrey came a week later. Jessie's lawyers, recognizing the utter futility of a court battle that would only expose him to further criminal liability, had surrendered. "They've agreed to everything, Callista," Audrey said, a rare note of satisfaction in her voice. "They're not even countering. The infidelity clause is triggered. He's signing over the penthouse, the agreed-upon assets, and the stock portfolio. He just wants this to go away." Kay closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. There was no triumphant joy, no thrill of victory. There was only a profound, quiet sense of release, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and painful fever had finally broken. "Thank you, Audrey," she said softly. "Thank you for helping me draw the plans." 3 months later, the scandal had been buried by the relentless pace of the city. In a sun-drenched loft in Tribeca, the noise of the street below seemed a world away. The expansive space with its high ceilings, exposed brick and massive industrial windows was a testament to her own aesthetic, strong, honest, and full of light. A simple brass plate next to the door read, "Pierce and Associates." This was both her home and the headquarters of her new architectural firm. She stood over a large drafting table, not a designer gown in sight. She wore simple linen trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, her bare feet on the warm, polished concrete floor. The loft smelled of fresh paint, brewing coffee, and the limitless potential of a new beginning. Blueprints were spread out across the table, the precise, elegant lines depicting not a skyscraper, but a nursery. She ran a hand over the designs, imagining the soft grey walls, the clean lines of the white oak crib, the large window that would let in the morning light. It was a space designed for peace, for safety, for love, everything her old life had lacked. As she stood there, contemplating the future she was meticulously building, she felt it a strong, definitive kick from within. A powerful flutter that was no longer a surprise, but a conversation, a connection. She smiled, placing both hands on her belly, a wave of overwhelming love washing over her. This was why she had done it. Not for revenge, but for this. For this child who would be born not into a gilded cage of lies, but into a home built on a foundation of truth and strength. She had watched Jesse's world burn, not with malice, but with the dispassionate understanding of an architect watching a condemned building be demolished to make way for a new, better structure. She had taken the pain, the betrayal, and the humiliation, and she had used it as fuel. She had designed her escape with the same precision she brought to her work. And now, in the quiet of her own space, surrounded by her own plans, Callista Pierce was finally home. She was no longer a character in someone else's story. She was the architect of her own, and the foundation was solid. And so Callista Pierce Ellington, a woman pushed to the edge, refused to be a victim. She became the architect of her own justice. She proves that the most powerful revenge isn't loud or hysterical. It's intelligent, precise, and delivered on your own terms. She didn't just leave a toxic marriage. She leveled an empire built on deceit and reclaimed her own life brick by brick. This is a story about the incredible strength that can be found in the ashes of betrayal, and a reminder to never ever underestimate the person you've wronged. What did you think of Kay's ultimate plan? Was it a stroke of genius or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of epic revenge and incredible empowerment, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true-life dramas where justice is finally served. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single takedown.